Right, so welcome. Thank you so much for coming to this session. Now, this session today is actually 6 sessions that I did of 2 hours, and we're going to condense it into 2 hours. So it's actually 12 hours worth of CPD into 2 hours. So it is going to be rather fast and furious. And there will be this recording going on. And when we finished, this will be sent to you. So you will have a recording. So if I'm going too fast and you can't keep up, don't worry, you can always look at it and watch it on slow-mo. It'll probably be better. So I'm going to share my screen with you. There we go. And when you get sent if you're on Hub, it will just be shared to you. If you are sent this sharing, then you will see at the front page that it says a recording of this session is available here. If you click on here, then you will see it will take you to a link to a video, and that video will be this recording. Okay, so if you have a Hub account, as I said, please put it in the chat, the email account, the email address, if you have not booked through it. If you booked through it for Eventbrite, I've got it anyway. If you haven't, don't worry, because I can transfer it on WeTransfer. But if you get a recording on WeTransfer, it will run out, so you will have to download it. If you're on Hub, then you can access it anytime. If you do get it on WeTransfer and for some reason you lose it, just email me or contact me again and I can then send it, but it will last for a week, I think it does. Right, so first of all, bit of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones on mute. As I said, we are recording this session. If you want to use the chat function, please do. I will try and answer questions at the end, but as I said, this is going to be very fast. If there are any questions in the chat that I haven't answered, I will make every effort to send that information with you when I send the recording as well. We're not going to be using any breakout rooms or any apps or anything like that. My contact details here are on the second page. So if you do have any questions, you can always email me or follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Bit about me, first of all. My name's Dawn Thomas. I run Nature Days, so I only teach outdoors. So I'm an outdoor learning provider. I teach everything from nursery up to A-level and teachers as well. And I specialize in obviously outdoor learning, and I do cross-curricular. So I do all 6 of the AOLEs. I'm based in Gower in South Wales, so I do field trips there. And that's for local schools, but also some schools come over from all over the country, including England as well. But I also do a lot of insets. I'm traveling all over the place. And I've also got a YouTube channel, which I set up over COVID to help schools actually try and get their learners to do outdoor learning in their home working as well. And I've also got outdoor learning resources that I've been developing, all specifically based on outdoor learning with the new curriculum in mind, which is on the Nature Days website. The aim of today's session is purely to provide you with ideas. Every time I do a session, everyone wants ideas for doing outdoor learning. So that is what we're focusing on today. I'm going to provide you with practical ideas to cover every single one of the AOLEs, so all 6 of them. So I'm not going to be going through the content of what each What Matters statement actually includes, but I will be teaching or giving you ideas of how to teach each What Matters statement through outdoor learning. So if you want more details on specific AOLEs, I've done each of these as a 2-hour session, and those are available to purchase as a download from the Nature Days website. But we're going to try and cover them all. So we're going to start straight away with our maths and numeracy. And of course, maths and numeracy is very straightforward and easy to do outdoors. It's probably the one that most people are most comfortable with. So starting with What Matters statement 1, which is all about number. And we're talking about progression step 1 now, really. So your foundation phase, thinking about your continuous provision, so much that you can do in terms of outdoor learning and your continuous provision. Using loose parts, you can use that to introduce number as a much more concrete way, and also to allow learners to engage in this mathematical concept from more than one perspective. So for example, going outside and trying to make numbers out of loose parts, such as this picture down in the middle here. You can also use objects to count or group or to create sets. And again, so much variety in outdoors that we can use as resources. So on this right-hand side, we're using leaves here to sort into groups. We can also look at ordering in terms of less than and more than, and using that huge variety of numbers and those large numbers to do things like estimating. So especially things like blades of grass. So we're looking at all these loose parts as availability as a potential for teaching number. We can also look at number order. This could be something that you're just looking at in progression step 1, looking at bigger and smaller than, so bigger sticks, smaller sticks are sorting out into orders. You can also use loose parts to actually make this actual shape of the numbers, and also making pictures out of a set number. And what you're doing then is you're reinforcing their counting. So if they're making a picture out of 20 loose parts, then you're reinforcing their understanding of the counting to 20, but then they're making something out of it as well. Along similar lines is that you could give them a box. It could be a small little box, and they just have to fit as many objects as they can in it, and you can see how high they can count as well. If you're using your outdoor area, of course, just remember there is so many numbers that are naturally around there. So such as this picture on the top right here. So you can go on number hunts. I know a lot of people go and do hunts in their school grounds that requires a lot of effort of you putting things out. I'm not really a fan of that, because I think it's too much work for the teacher. So use what's naturally out there. So going out and trying to find the numbers within signs, or even the shapes of them, like you get lots of zeros when you see the trees have been cut off. You can also collect numbers as well. I usually do with an activity with my students, I give them a paper bag and I say, right, we're going to go on a number hunt. I've put the first number into your bag, and they open their bag and there's nothing in it. And they go, there's nothing in my bag. And I say, yes, exactly. That's the first number. You've got 0 inside your bag. We're now going to go and collect one number of something and put that in. So they go and get a blade of grass and they put it in. Then we get 2 of something different and put that in. And then they arrange it all on the ground, and they can even write with chalk underneath it the numbers that they have collected. You can make that slightly more complicated for the older year groups when you're collecting numbers of different objects, like a scavenger hunt. So you can bring in some vocabulary there. So you want 3 long items, 2 spiky items, 7 soft items. And again, they have to sort them and count them at the same time. If we're thinking about progression step 2, so we're moving on now to key stage 2, a really good way of bringing in an awful lot of maths outdoor is to create maths trails. Now, this is a great way of testing understanding of any mathematical concept that you've taught inside or outside. But it's really important to you to create your own bespoke maths trail for your school grounds. You can, it's a really great idea to get the older ones, the year 6s, to create a maths trail for the younger year groups. And it also reinforces their understanding of the problem solving issue or the concept that you're covering. Also means you don't have to make it. So there are lots of examples online, and I'll be referring throughout this presentation to a Padlet, which is a website that I've designed with resources that you can link to throughout the internet. And that's got some examples from all of the AOLEs, but that's got a great range of maths trails in them. However, there's no way you can pick one and put it into your school ground. So the kind of questions you should be thinking about to put into a maths trail are things like estimating the numbers of steps if you've got large staircases, and then you get them to check their answer by counting them. You can also give them some problem solving. You can say, how many fence panels would we need if we wanted to replace the fencing? What about how far it is to the shop or to the nursery yard or to the school gate? And then you can try and make some more problem solving ones, such as how many children will fit on all the school benches in the school grounds. Try and, especially with key stage 2, try and avoid lots of counting numbers in your trail. They should be fine with counting when you get to key stage 2. So you don't want to reinforce that. Unless that's one of your issues with your learners and they want to find out what the actual, if you want to find out what how they're doing with their counting.
Well, thank you for getting back to me. I really appreciate it.
Can I just ask you to mute?
I don't know whether is it worth me
mute
emailing the complaint over to you, or I mean, there's not a lot in it in terms of Mum has.
There we go. Sorry about that. Right, get back. So yeah, so think about your school grounds. What would be suitable for your school grounds? What maths can you see in your school grounds? And a great way of doing that is just walk around your school grounds and look for the maths that you can actually find. And if you create a maths trail, you can then think of every aspect of maths, all concepts of maths, and put them into one trail. And then when you create a maths trail at the end of a topic, you draw out the questions that you need for, say you're doing area, and then you put that into a maths trail and you send the students out when they've finished, and then you can focus on the ones who are still struggling inside. Thinking about what subjects and concepts you're doing, you could be doing percentages. So you could say that if 25% of the car's headlights weren't working, how many bulbs would we need to get? We can also look at bigger and smaller hunts. So again, helping with mathematical language, size and scale and estimation. You could challenge them to just pick things out of a bucket that say things like hug something that's bigger than you, find a tree that's shorter than you. Number lines are really useful. You may have them already drawn on your school grounds, or you can draw with them with chalk, and it helps to look at things like negative numbers. Also, thermometers are great for teaching negative numbers, which is quite an abstract concept. Line up activities. If you've got a number line, you can do this for lining up and sorting things. It could be something like your rocks, the hardest to the softest. It could be colors of the rainbow. You could put things in size order for the younger ones for progression step 1, so width, length. You could also put themselves in order as well. Outside, you've also got the possibility of estimating large numbers. So things like blades of grass. So how many blades of grass are there on your school grounds? Do not get them to do that by counting. You need to come up with a sampling method or a problem solving method, looking at how you're going to estimate a smaller area and then multiply it to get it bigger. You can also, for the younger learners, of course, to try and make sure they've got their numbers, is to find out how many benches there are, or doors or windows. So you pick what you want to ask them and you're putting that into a maths trail that will help them, and you can then see from afar. Important thing with maths trails is sometimes the answer is not what's important. So if you send them off to find out how many different shapes there are in the school grounds, and they come back and they go, oh, there's 72. You don't want to be going off and trying to find out if they're right. You need to test their understanding of what these shapes are. So the methodology that they use to answer the question is what you are checking. The actual answer is not that important. If they can justify what they did and what they found, then they've got the answer right. It doesn't matter if their answer is different to other people. If you've got a veg patch, there is so many possibilities for teaching number with that. If you just look on the back of the seed packet, you'll see there's so much seed number there. So numbers of seeds, how deep they've got to go, how many can go in a row, how far they need to be apart. So opportunities for so much numbers in there. You can also use scale with your loose parts as well, and your leaves. So this picture in the middle here, you can create a simple shape, just a square or just any shape at all. And then you've got to then increase or decrease the scale. You can then transfer that onto a piece of paper as well to reduce the size of it. That leads really nicely into mapping activities. And if you've got a map of your school grounds, there's so much maths that you can do. Not only can you use maths once you've got a map, you can use maths to create the map in the first place. So if you just print off a bit of Google Earth, which is directly above your school, make sure it's actually directly above, you can automatically see the numbers of shapes you've got there. And you can also start to get an idea of what things you could measure. So we've got some area, we got some perimeter, but you can also start to make it a version of a proper map by trying to work out the scale of it. So measuring it on the piece of paper, then measuring the same place on the ground and working out what the scale is. Now, if you do this, it does make sense to print it out at a really easy scale. So like a 10 so 1 centimeter is 50 meters, something like that. Because if you don't do that, you'll find that 1 centimeter is 27 meters, and that's your 27 times table, which might be a bit too challenging. You can also look at some sums, so looking at multiplication. So this on the right in the middle with the pebbles, creating arrays, again, using loose parts. But also nature is fantastic, and it provides us with lots of opportunities for actually undertaking multiplication. So on the top here, we can do a multiplication using leaves. We've got pine needles, which are in pairs, that's your 2 times table. You've got buttercup ones in the middle, that's your 3. You've got horse chestnut, that's your 5. And then when you move on from that, you can go on to count in legs, so your mini beasts. So you've got your 6 times table with your insects, 8 times table with your spiders, or if you want a 12 times table, you can use your woodlice. So there's a lot there that you can use to teach or reinforce multiplication, but you're using different things. Divide and conquer, again, you've got lots of space outside, so you can provide lots of hoops out in your yard. And if you use a whiteboard and give them a sum, so obviously their whole class is the whole number, and then you're dividing it by the number of hoops. So if you write that sum down on the whiteboard, they then have to get themselves into the hoop. You can see what the remainder is, and you can see where the sum is connecting to the actual division that you're actually doing. You can also then take away a hoop, and it's good for reinforcing the correct language and visualizing what you're actually doing. You can also theme that to do with your topic, looking at things like islands or pirates. And you can also make sure that you do associate it with the sum, because you're actually bringing this sum to life by doing the actual division. A doubling game on the bottom here, we've got a 10 square. So you can use 10 egg box squares now, because egg boxes can come in 10s. But if you've got a 10 square, you can do so much with that. You can place one item in one square, and then you can double it and make 2 in the next one. Or you could do factors as well. So you could give them a number such as 8, and they've got to fill the boxes with the factors of 8. So you've got to put a 1 in and a 2 in and a 4 in and an 8 in, and see how well they can do that as well. All this kind of leads into what you could do in a maths scavenger hunt as well. So combining lots of these together, and if you provide them with something to collect them in, like an egg box or a grid, they can find different objects and they can give them points for each object. So the more difficult ones to find, you give higher numbers of points. So they have to decide whether it's worth to go and find those and spend more time, or whether it's better to get lots of the 1 markers or the 1 point ones. In the middle here, we've got game ladders. You might have played this at school, but this is great for maths. If they're lying feet to feet in pairs, you have the yellow team against the blue team. Each one has a number in pairs. You say a sum. When the answer is calculated by the children, if it's their number, they have to run up across the legs and then round the back and back to the space, and you see which team wins, whether it's the yellow or the blue. And again, Veg Patch, I've said about great for looking at numbers, is also great for money. So a great enterprise project is to give your students some money. I suggest something like 20p. They have to buy some seeds. Now, obviously, they can't buy a whole pack of seeds. They have to combine together with other people to collect to buy seeds. Seeds, there'll be 200 carrot seeds in a pack. They can't sow all that many. They're given a square of the Veg Patch, and they have to then see how much money they can make out of their square. So they can either grow the crops and then sell them, or they could upcycle them by turning them into soup or smoothies, and you can see how much money they can make. Right, moving on to fractions, which is also in the What Matters statement 1, all about number. Fraction walls are really useful. That's this thing in the middle here with the sticks. So we're looking at whole numbers, that's a whole stick, and then halves, that's 2 sticks, quarters, etc. So you can use sticks that you find, or you can actually make yourself a set of fraction walls, sticks that are actually exactly 1 meter. It does help if you can get them exactly right, because it's tricky to actually understand fractions if they're not exactly fractions. You can also look at group leaf fractions. So on the bottom right here, there's lots of ways in which we can use leaves, best done in autumn time when we've got lots of colors. So we can look at the fractions of a group of leaves, which is a certain color. We can also look at it within the tree. We can also look at it as individual leaves. Can we find a tree which is a leaf which is half green and half red, or 1/5 red and 4/5 green? You can also, again, using the matchboxes that I mentioned before, so filling a matchbox or a box with lots of different items, and then you separate them out, and you have to calculate the fraction of proportion of each of those items. Again, you can do scavenger hunts, focusing in on fractions. So go and find a stone which is a quarter of its width, a quarter of its length, or a leaf which is half its width wide, or again, as we say, one that's 2/3 of a yellow leaf. So they have to use their observation skills, but they also have to use their maths there. 10 frames, like this picture in the middle down the bottom here. We can use that a bit like when you do Numicon. So we're creating a Numicon, or we can use it as fractions. So each one is a 0.1, so which is a tenth. So we can represent that as 5/10 or 6/10. And then again, planting in the Veg Patch. It's so much maths there. You can then say, right, so we've got so much space here. What proportion of the space, or what fraction of the space are we going to cover in with carrots? What proportion is going to be left for tomatoes? And if you look at the top right, you do this in class a lot, where you create a square and then you have to shade in a half or a quarter. You can do the same, but with different materials. So half of it is leaves, a quarter of it is grass, etc. Right, what matters statement 2, we're looking more at algebra. Now, I know what matters statement 2 refers more to key stage 2. It's not so much for progression step 1, but you can do some using things like repeating pattern, and loose parts are great for that. If you could start a repeating pattern and get your partners to copy and continue the pattern and organize it. You can also represent numbers in equations with natural materials, like this picture on the top right. And we can also create magic number squares that you probably do in class using natural materials and loose parts. Maths mazes are also great on the yard, drawing them out. And again, it's a bit like getting from A to B without going in, by going in a certain direction, and they don't know what it is. So it's a bit of problem solving there. Right, next one. So what matters statement 3 is the geometry. So it's all about geometry, and it's huge. It's a really big what matters statement. So we're looking at sorting sticks by length. So that's progression step 1, finding sticks. They're always going to be different sizes. You can also measure with loose parts. So we're looking at non-standard units, how to make a meter out of leaves, measuring how long your leg is out of leaves. We can also estimate lengths. So we've got large lengths that we can estimate, like the playground or the field, and then we can measure it again with tape measures. So you're looking at different equipment to measure that isn't a ruler, which is really useful. We can also estimate heights of buildings and trees. So using somebody standing underneath it, see how many of that person it is to get to the top of it. Finding a tree that's your age, love doing that, because they all go around like this going, oh, where's my tree? And they don't realize they go up as well as out. And then find a tree that you can hug. We can measure trees in arm widths. So if we find a partner, we go around with 4 arms and find a 3 and get 6 arms. Also, when you're doing a continuous provision with water play, so much that you can do there, looking at volume and in different containers. However, the really important thing to try and encourage outdoor learning and numeracy in that is actually by questioning and using really good questioning technique to kind of get them to understand the maths behind how they're using their continuous provision. Just like the maths trails, we can also do measuring trails. So think about what they could measure and what they could estimate. Using your map of your school grounds, we could measure things like the perimeter and area. We can also use trundle wheels and to take measures, and again, using pacing. And we can measure trees, circumference going around the sides, but also angles. And you can actually measure how tall it is by looking between your legs. And if you can see the top of the tree when you're away from the tree, that's the distance between you and the tree. It's actually the height of the tree. Using your natural weather within your school grounds is also a great way of collecting data, using rain gauges, thermometers, and that's a great thing of doing it every day to bring some maths into your everyday. Right, so what matters statement 3? So again, looking at shapes, shape hunts for progression step 1, but also starting to build shapes, 3D shapes, trying to identify them. You can use mazes, great use of rotational symmetry to create mazes, angle hunts, looking up trees and seeing how the angle goes. If there's a 90-degree angle, find it, which is just your hand like that. So you can do that to find them, but seeing how many angles there are, which are acute in natural areas compared to in man-made areas. We can also looking at compass work, that's all maths, looking at degrees and bearings and rotation, and you can send them on trails going rotational, either going to anti-clockwise or clockwise. You can also teach coordinates, looking at either on a small scale, like a fake archaeological dig, or putting coordinates onto your map. So you've got grid references as well. Times using hoops. I thought everybody's done that. And a much more difficult one for Key Stage 2 is actually making water clocks to try and get water to go down in a set period of time. Right, what matters statement 4, I'm already over time, is the easiest thing to teach, and we'll cover some of this when we look at the science and technology. So basically, you can undertake a science investigation and you will cover all the statistics in the maths, what matters statement 4. So I'll look at that when we go on to the science bit. But if you want to undertake an investigation which is purely maths, here's some ideas here. So these are questions, problem solving that they'll go and try and find the answer to using their math skills and applying them so that you can understand if they really get that sense of usefulness. And then what matters statement 4, this is the last one, sorting, again, so much variation naturally outside. So we've got sorting, we can do Venn diagrams, Carroll diagrams. Leaf logic is putting one leaf down next to it, and you can only change that leaf by one factor. So it could be the same shape, but it's got to be the same color, like on this picture on the right. And this can help you with making dichotomous keys, which again is good for teaching your science and technology. Probability for the progression step 2, you can also do coin toss walk. So you throw it when you go, when it's ahead, you go left, when it's tails, you go right. And again, probability of actually finding specific animals in your school grounds, depending on how rare they are. Reasoning challenges is probably the best way of bringing all of those what matters statements together. So you're giving them a problem that they have to then undertake maths to answer in the school grounds. So things like if we want to repaint the fence at school, or we want to have a campsite in the school, how many tents can we fit in? You can also set up dinosaur trails. There's a great resource which is on the Padlet, looking at ratios of dinosaur footprints, but you can set that up in your school as a little CSI. Veg patch, as I've said, about profit, but also looking around your school grounds. If you've got any trees, if you could chop one down or it fell down, would it hit your school? These are great ways of bringing all of those what matters statements together in a cross context way within your maths, and also bringing it to life. Right, on to science and technology. So science and technology, what matters statement 1 is actually all about the inquiry process. So the science investigative process, and even at progression step 1, you're just getting them to ask questions. So again, if you've got the right equipment out there, they will be asking questions. You just need to be asking the right questions. So water pumps, magnifying glasses, marble tubes and runs, guttering, lots of people have that, but ramps and cars. Think about what you've got inside, how can you bring it outside and make it more meaningful, and use the different layers in your school grounds. Construction, if you've got construction or you've got materials, it's really important that you bring things out, or you have activities outside that don't have an obvious use. So cardboard boxes, crates, anything that can be repurposed. If you've got something that only does one thing, then you're very much limiting the questioning aspect. So that's this what matters statement 1 in science and technology. So when you've got those continuous provisions going on outside, TAs or teachers really need some questions to ask them to try and move that learning on and get them to ask questions. So I would suggest you actually print out possible questions next to your areas of continuous provision, so that if TAs or teachers are there, want to ask them questions, there are some stacks of them there. So these are the kind of questions you could ask, and you are setting them up to start thinking about the scientific inquiry process. This is the first stage, questioning, and that's what the what matters statement 1 is all what matters statement 1 progression step 1 is all about. When we start going into progression step 2 and 3, we need to start undertaking complete investigations. So we cover questioning, variables, method, the equipment, results, conclusion, evaluation as well. And I've got a whole set of slides here which covers lots of questions that you could use in your school grounds if you've got the right habitats. So we can talk about sowing things. Obviously, do seeds need light and soil? We can look at habitats. Now, these questions here might be ones that you've undertaken, but what's important is that if you are using them in one key stage or one class, you need to make sure there's progression going on. So you need to know how to differentiate them. So if I move to the next slide, I've put on for each of these investigative titles, how you can do it with progression step 2. Sometimes it's just what you do with your results. Do you do a bar graph or a scatter graph? That will move them from progression step 2 to 3. It also provides you with options to stretch them. So although we're not doing progression step 4 in primary, you might find that you've got students that could be pushed to the next stage. So they're all undertaking the same investigation, but you can differentiate to make sure that they are being challenged or being scaffolded. We can also cover a lot of the other what matters statement in science and technology through these investigations. So we've got like the physics side of it, and looking at materials and which one decomposes faster. You can look at reflecting light, looking at making things warm. I know a lot of people do investigations into huddling penguins, but you can do it outside, trying to keep ice cubes actually frozen outside in blazing heat by using natural materials as an insulator. And again, this is how you can differentiate them and make sure that there's a challenge. You've also got things like waves and space, and although that's quite a big thing to try and cover in actual outdoor learning, you can still do investigations to do that. Which material will keep you warm in space, because of course space is freezing, and blocking UV light. That links really nicely to creating visors for astronauts. There's a great Padlet resource there that you can see as well. And we're looking at sound as well, and trying to progress. If we're going to progress across this, then you're going to try and get them to think about the materials, as opposed to in progression step 2, you might give them the materials you want to use. And then I think this is the last one on the investigations, thinking about trampling in your school grounds. You're bound to have an area, especially in the goalposts, where it is trampled on. There you can measure what happens to the plants that are growing there, whether they're growing better, worse, higher, in a different form. As well as the inquiry process in what matters for 1, there's also this thing on impact on the environment. Great opportunities for you to survey your grounds, looking for sustainable and unsustainable resources, and looking at things that are going to decompose or not. It also provides you with the opportunity to link into what matters statement 2, which is about the design process and designing ways to improve your school grounds for either living creatures like the children there, but also increasing or improving the habitats that are there. What matters statement 2 is probably the biggest change in the science and technology AOLE, because it is DT. But what you need to do is to integrate this design thinking. In progression step 1, you're just giving them something simple to build. So build a shelter, no parameters. Progression step 2, you're going to give them some parameters. Make sure that you can keep your puppets dry. Then when you move on to progression step 3, they're going through the whole of the design process, which includes researching, finding out about where would be the best location, waterproofing materials, maybe using tools, testing their design, then redesigning it, and then improving it and communicating the design, and then identifying how it solves problems and respond to feedback. Now that is the design process, and the design process can then be applied to anything that you build in the school grounds. And it's great to link that what matters statement 2 in science and technology to something you're maybe covered in humanities or in one of your topics. So on this bottom right picture, this is a roller coaster. So you could design and build a roller coaster, and that's going to be science that you're covering there, but you could then fit that into maybe some health and well-being. You can create cable car systems using pulleys, obstacle courses, models of solar system, windbreaks, etc. And then when you start to get into more complicated designs, once they've got that process in their head, that design process, you can start to build challenging ones from problem solvers. So redesigning your school grounds so that they're better for your health and well-being, better for accessibility for people with wheelchairs. You could build an irrigation system for your flower bed, or siege machines like this one on the top right here, and then you can link that into history. You could then undertake an investigation that fires things to see which one of your siege machines actually is the best, most effective. You can also link it in with history, looking at houses. So we're designing a Celtic roundhouse here. It could be a Tudor house. It could be designing an extension for your school. So all of those are possible ways in which you can introduce the design ideas and the design process. That's what matters statement 2. For what matters statement 3, we're looking at the natural world. So again, probably the easiest one to actually teach outside if you've got lots of natural space and you've got lots of places where you can actually collect animals. And for progression step 1, we're just sorting living things and non-living things, looking at school ground survey. For progression step 2, we're starting to look at the animals and trying to sort them. So if you've got a range of habitats, you can look for mini beasts. If you've got ponds, great for dipping, sweep netting in long grass, tree beating to get them from trees. You've also got life cycles, especially this time of year at springtime. You've got the butterflies coming out and the caterpillars that are pupating. If you've got those animals, especially if you're keeping them inside, watch them obviously go through the life cycle, but also think about what might be in your pond. An awful lot of pond animals have got really fascinating life cycles, and it's good to look at relationships. You can build that into food chains, etc. And if you, as soon as you've got these habitats created in your school grounds, the creation of it can be part of the design aspect of the What Matters statement too, and then you start monitoring it and seeing how the animals are coming in and how they work together. That's your What Matters statement 3. Food chains come in there when you literally can watch your animals eating each other or finding out what they eat, doing surveys. So if you're building something like a mini beast house, don't think that that's the end result. That's the start of you doing investigations into what's moving in, what lives there, what it likes to live, what conditions it likes. So try and build in some use of it once you've actually created these structures as well. The content within What Matters Statement 3 covers these 6 aspects. So we've got adaptation. Again, if you've got mini beasts within your school grounds, then you can sketch them. You can then design a best one for a different location. Camouflage, you can either camouflage yourself and disappear, or you can try and find animals that are camouflaged. Looking at how they move and how they're adapted, especially in environments such as the water. Interdependence is how things move, how things affect each other. So you can see which one has got the most. Is it the herbivores or it's the carnivores? You can say which one is eating which. You can model how it all goes through the system. So how the nutrients go when they die, or they get decomposed. Structures, if you've got trees in your school grounds, you can look at them. It's really good to come outside and look at the structures of trees, the structures of flowers, actually identifying the parts in situ. So this one on the bottom here, this picture is build a tree. So everybody there is taking part in being an aspect of the tree. Creating tree identification guides of your school grounds really gets your year 5s and 6s to focus in and observe the distinguishing features of the trees, and then create that as a fact file. Reproduction, flowers, again, dissecting them. If you've got them in your school grounds, if you can dissect them, especially if you've got wind pollinated ones, you can see how they move. You can start to see how seeds get dispersed by looking for little saplings for the larger trees. You can look at which mini beasts like, which pollinators like different flower colors. So this picture in the middle here is all the different colors. And when you see a mini beast, such as a bumblebee, land on each one, you then put a Lego block inside. When it's finished, you then put them up and you've got a vertical graph. You can create systems as well in your school grounds. I've done recreations of the circulatory system. So everybody picks up oxygen from the lungs, puts it into goes to the heart, then goes to the body, then goes back with carbon dioxide. And large scale models like that are really good ways of them understanding these difficult things that on pictures really are quite hard to understand. You can also grow plants looking at the ways in which hormones move them. So this picture of this plant here, which is exfoliating, so it's going left and right, is due to hormones. And lots of plants grow in weird ways because of hormones. So you can have a go if you've got flowers, you can pick certain bits of them and then they grow out in sideways. So that's all to do with hormones as well. You can also see how growth rings change in different directions and see how that growth is changing with aspects or sunlight. Right, What Matters Statement 4, we're talking about the physical side, so materials. So in What Matters Statement 1, you could literally go around your school ground. For progression step 1, you can look at your school ground looking for different materials, natural, man-made. You can then sort things by properties, thinking about describing them, again, bringing in some literacy there. Linking into books is really good. So things like the Three Pigs house, creating different little houses made out of different materials. For progression step 2, so as we move on to key stage 2, we can start to bring in some of that chemistry, so dissolving. So you've got things you might bring in that you might try and dissolve, but what about things outside? So maybe finding some soil and mud and different seeds and see if any of those. We can also investigate density with that as well, things like a seed, which are there floating and sinking, and try and link that into the reason why they might float or sink. You can also, when we go on to What Matters Statement 4, we're now going to be thinking about ways in which the chemistry of chemicals actually change. Now, this is more with progression step 2, but it's fascinating stuff that you can do. And again, if you link it into a topic that you're doing, then it's going to be meaningful. So if you're doing the Fire of London, not just making the houses and then setting fire to them, but if we look at properties, why did those houses burn so quickly? And if we create a house, is it going to burn quicker if it's made out of cardboard, or if it's made out of straw, or if it's made out of wood, or if it's made out of brick? And so you can bring into those as well. You can also separate materials, especially soil is a mixture of lots of materials. If you've got a fire circle or a place where you can actually light fires and do cooking of any kind, there's some great chemical reactions you can do there. Obviously, you've got fire, you've got combustion, but you can melt things. You can then use it also to boil. So you've got changes of state as well, freezing and melting. And all of those are really, really, they're great for observation when you're actually using a fire to do that. You've also got chemical reactions, things like Mentos and Coke. They love that, but we can look at the science behind it and the chemical reactions behind those as well. Energy, again, I've said about penguins huddling as an investigation, but also you can use trying to keep things warm outside using natural materials. You can also do looking at energy types within your school grounds, so where there'll be potential energy, where there'll be chemical energy. You can also think about transferring energy, making water wheels, marble run. So if you make a roller coaster with what matters statement 2 with that design aspect, you can then identify the forces or the energy types. So the top, we've got potential energy, kinetic energy, etc., centrifugal forces. So you're trying to bring in those as well. Using rockets to identify energy and how it works, again, linking in with forces as well. Thinking of how using your school grounds as a renewable resource of energy. So could we generate solar powered energy? Could we generate some wind energy? And all this can be used in your school grounds. And also thinking about how ways in which you can stop wasting energy in your school as well. Forces, you do a lot with speed and friction quite often, but why not take it outside and investigate on different surfaces like the grass or ramps if you've got them. Also transferring heat from one form to another, using, if you can do fire by friction, that's a great way of transferring heat and requires a lot of energy. Crater experiment, dropping objects onto powder, usually flour works, and you can see the craters, how it changes as you go up. Air resistance investigations, I've been doing this today with parachutes, and you can also use it for wind resistance when you're using sails, using connects along the yard. Roller coasters, again, we've got different forces, so you can say which force is working at which point. And working against gravity, you can use kites for that. You can use water squirters, and there's a solar balloon here, which is a great way to get heat to actually move objects up in the air instead of the wind. So what matters statement 5 is all about light, sound, electricity, magnetism. Basically, it's everything that couldn't fit into all the other ones, and lots of investigation you can do outside. Looking at UV, there's some UV beads you can do, which is this guide here, which changes color depending on how much UV they're exposed to. So you can do a little study. You can also measure light levels using an app. You can measure sound using an app as well. And then you can go around your school grounds and see if you can find places which are louder. You can create echoes. You can see what sound travels the fastest. Is it high sound or low sound? And then you can use slinkies as well to demonstrate movement of waves, as well as actually making waves in puddles in your school grounds as well. Right, last one is all about algorithms. So we're talking about conditional statements. So really simple outside, you can just do things like Simon says, and that will help you to generate some practical computing, as we call it. So you're moving instead of just having it on the code. So you're coding the instructions that you're giving. So you could code anything. You could code building a den, you code lighting a fire, and then somebody follows the code and actually does the activity. Then we've got our sensors and actuators. Great way of bringing proper computing into real life. So you could get them to set up a GPS trail to find locations in their school grounds, or you could collect data using a data logger like a weather station. You could also map things and collect data using an app such as Survey 123. You can create irrigation systems by having a sensor that senses it's dry and it tells the actuator to squirt the water or to open up the tap. And it means that you're creating something which is useful for your school grounds, but you're using that computing for it. Right. Okay. Hope everyone's still with me. I know there's a lot we're getting through. Right. Next one then. So we're getting on to literacy, language and communication. Now, literacy, language and communication, the What Matters Statement 1 is all about the language that connects us. And sometimes it's easy just to take some things that you're doing inside and take them outside. Like, for example, your Eisteddfod. Just try, think about all the ways in which you present in your Eisteddfod. Can you just take that outside? But when we're trying to connect us, we're connecting with the outdoors this way. We're going to concentrate on the art of naming. So using the names of organisms outside and trying to make sense of those. So there's some great Welsh examples of this. They're actually a lot better than the English. So such as the English for fox is actually in Welsh, it means bushy, which makes much more sense. Hedgehog, the meaning is in Welsh is actually thorny. And so the use of the language there, because of course the What Matters statements cover all languages, there's Welsh, English and an international language. So actually finding that link to it is really important. We can also use it to name locations on that map that you've been creating, trying to find out what's there so that we can actually name it so it makes sense. You can use all the world around you to also inspire you to write poems. So going around and observing and naming things, finding adjectives. You can also think, especially for the older year groups, of the etymology of words. So where do these words come from? Plants are great like this. So we got bluebell, that's obvious, apart from the fact it's purple. Buttercup, actually it's not. It's actually because if the cows eat a field which is full of buttercups, they get really good butter. Hart's tongue fern is a fern that's got a tongue that looks like a heart, which is a heart as in a deer or a stag. So you can come up with your own naming system for organisms. So if you go on a mini beast hunt and you collect things and then you decide what to call them based on an etymology, we could say, right, it's named after its location, its shape, its size, and where we found it. So under a log, etc. And then we rename that. But there's also some fantastic names that you can take from nature. So we've got Devil's Coach Horse beetle, which is this one on the right here, Monkey Puzzles tree. These all tell you something about the plant. We've also got their Latin name, which when you look at them, first of all, you think, oh my goodness, that looks horrendous. But lots of these are being used in Harry Potter. So we got Arigogina, which is actually from Harry Potter, but that's actually a Latin name, which is for a spider. And we've also got this one here, which looks like something you can't pronounce, but it actually means you betcha golly. So trying to find something that relates to the actual organism that you're finding. And again, with the Welsh names, you can use that as well. And you can come up with a story to try and explain where these names come from. So you can make up the animal's name, and then you can think about where that name came from and a story around it. What the Lost Words by Robert Macfarlane. If you haven't used this, it's a fantastic resource. There's also an online Waggle internet site that's got loads, it's a Padlet, loads of examples of what you could do. Each page is about one of the plants or animals that they think has been lost from the English language by children, and it provides you with a rap or a spell, and you can then recreate that with your own fact file about those animals in your school grounds. And that links onto the older year groups. You could start to make fact files for all of the organisms you've got, or you could turn it into a spell book or into a nature journal. And then if you want to bring in some of those other languages, either the international or the Welsh, you can start to have a translation trail by having those words around the school grounds, naming those animals and plants, and then the translation into the other language as well. What Matters Statement 2 is about understanding language, and it starts at progression step 1 about listening. So of course, outdoors, there's so much to listen to. So it means that you have to be really fine-tuned. So listening to things like the birds, obviously listening to your instructions, but trying to distinguish the birds. Doesn't matter what they're called, it's just listening to them and distinguishing different ones, but also making different sounds themselves. We can also make the shapes of the words so that we can see their shape using loose parts, a bit like we could do with the numbers. We could go on a letter hunt, and again, using the sticks or using air writing, but also you've got probably got mud as well that you can use to do some drawing as well. For older ones, we can look for alliteration, and we can look for inspiration outside as well. And a great thing to do if you are working on a book, if you can set the scene from that book outside. So if you pick a book that's suitable to the landscape that you've got in your school grounds and read it outside, it really brings it to life. I had a group yesterday who were doing all about the explorers, and it was a survival day that we did. And I read them the chapter about fire, and we just lit a fire and it was sitting in front of us and they were on the other side. And I talked to them, I read them the whole chapter on fire, and they said afterwards that it meant so much more that they could see the fire and smell it and hear the crackles while I was telling them the story. So it really does bring it to life. For youngsters, some of those stories that you bring out over and over again, the Gruffalo, the bear hunt, great to recreate them outside, following that trail as you go through the school grounds, but also think about retelling it using your school grounds. So if you haven't got a beach in your school grounds, then what would happen to Stickman? So find your Stickman and then take him around the school grounds, and you come up with your version of Stickman's story based in your school grounds. If you need to do instructional writing, again, there's so many things you can write instructions for in your school grounds, like building a den, planting seeds, or directions to go on a trail. So bring in some directional language there as well. Nature journaling and fact filing, again, great purposeful writing. And if you want to get them to think from a different point of view, first person accounts from an observational point, from a different point of view, either from a tree or from another animal. It really starts to focus you in and trying to think what it's like from another point of view. So empathy comes in there. Letter writing, there's a great resource on the Padlet that's called the Secret Story, and you send letters to a fairy, they send them back, they give you a problem, you have to solve it, then you send a letter back, and it's a great little to and fro. So those little fairy houses are great to have either outside or in your school classroom. With your international Welsh language, of course, you can do all the same things that you do with your English, but do it in Welsh. So you can go on a Welsh letter hunt. You can go on a tour of your school grounds, thinking about the Welsh versions of the locations, or name your locations in Welsh. You can also reenact Welsh stories in your school grounds, ones that are relevant, or you can use a map direction. So you can go and then give them directions in Welsh as well. Right, what matters statement 3, we're looking at ways in which we can do some mark making as well. So again, you've got lots out there you can use. You've got mud, you've got wood if it's rotten. You can also listen, thinking about creating sound maps, thinking about echoes. For the older ones, adjective hunts, so looking for adjectives, looking for metaphors and synonyms. There's some great books. One's called Not a Stick and Not a Box, and it just gives you an idea of how imaginative they can be. You can also go on a collective noun hunt, so looking for groups of things, or a punctuation hunt, looking for full stops. So that could be just a knot in a tree or a nail in a fence. And the outdoors provides the opportunity to do a huge performance space. So using that backdrop that you've got in your school grounds as the backdrop to your performance. You can also, again, getting that different viewpoint, create something on a small scale and then describe it as a large screen landscape, or viewing it from a different point of view. If you've got older ones, a great way of finding out how they enjoy or like the outside areas, do a survey, and then based on what they say, they can use that to create persuasive writing to send that to their governors to say ways in which they'd like to improve their school grounds. And then again, writing questionnaires, a great way of using their language for a purpose. So finding out either they can go off site or they could do it on site and find out people's opinion of something or what they think about how the school grounds is being used. So international languages, Welsh and your international language, depending what you are. Again, thinking about your map, annotating it. Poem writing, you can do that in English, obviously, but also in Welsh. Annotating pictures of what you've drawn. If you do a film of as you walk around your school grounds and then you do a voiceover, you can do that in Welsh or your international language. And 20 questions is great because you come up with an object and somebody has to ask you 20 questions in Welsh about it and try and guess what it is. Listen and act, you have, again, in Welsh, you tell them to do something. in a certain way. So they have to crawl quietly. And then if again, you've used the words in Welsh or in your international language, you can really test that as well. So what matter statement 4 is all about literature and creativity. So they are coming up with their own version of, or they're listening to somebody else's literature. Creating songs and poetry outside, using it as an inspiration for it. So listening to the birds, trying to come up with those adjectives or those synonyms. Also looking at literature that's related to the environment that you've got. Retelling stories, as I said, you retell your bear hunt depending on the environments that you've got. You can use lots of different writing styles from different points of views. You can respond to the literature that you've got there. And then you can show empathy for characters, maybe by creating faces on trees so that you can see what their characters actually mean. And if you look outside, there are so many ways in which you can bring that story to life by going outside. It could be that you're creating poetry as you walk along. It could be that you've got puppets out there, or it could be that you're just using inspiration from outside, making poems about the objects. You can also use alliteration. A nice one to do is just a little one where they have a number poem. So they have to find a number and an adjective and an alliteration and an object. So they find one spiky leaf. And if each person does that, you then add it together and you get a group poem as well. You can also use landscapes to give you inspiration to write the setting for the scene. So it could be a miniature world, or it could be on a large scale. You could use outside to describe your characters. So you can literally role play, kind of try and move like an animal before you then use that language to describe it. You can also use that story to take you on a journey, and then use your senses to really come to understand what it's like to be in those environments. So if you're going outside and hearing a really cold story about the Arctic, and you're outside and it's really cold, they really get that understanding of what it's really like. And they usually come up with much greater adjectives when you go inside and start talking about it then and retelling the story. Crime scenes also, if you set up a crime scene and they try and describe to you what happened and then come up with a story around that, that's a great way of bringing it to life as well. With the Welsh and international languages, there's obviously a lot of poetry in the Welsh language, and it's usually about the landscape itself. So again, using that as inspiration, like R.S. Thomas, you can use that to think about ways in which you can actually use the inspiration from the landscape you've got to create some poetry. Eco poetry tries to say a message about eco, but also again uses the environment to actually make it much more meaningful, so it's more concrete. You've also got Welsh songs, loads of Welsh songs out there, loads of them mainly about the landscape of Wales as well. And again, retelling stories in another language, lots of Welsh folk stories which you could retell outside, which would be very suitable. And also describing characters. So you've got your characters from your story, describing them in another language. Right, okay, I've actually caught up with myself. Fantastic. I'm just going to quick check of the chat, see if I've missed anything. No, brilliant. Okay, right. I hope you're okay with those, with the cores, basically, as they were. So we've covered so far maths and numeracy, science and technology, literacy, language, communication. So now we're going to be looking at humanities. So with progression step 1 in What Matters Statement 1, what you're trying to do in What Matters Statement 1 is undertake a inquiry. Now, we went through the science investigation very fast for our What Matters Statement 1 for science and technology. What Matters Statement 1 in humanities is very similar, but for an inquiry process. An inquiry process is very similar to the science investigation process, but the question could be much broader. So what you're trying to do in your continuous provision is you're teaching them again to ask questions, and you need to expose the learners to a range of environments that allows them to explore and to develop as many things as they can. So providing them with opportunities to explore the weather and how humanities work, such as the geography around them. We can provide them with windmills or kites or flags looking at the wind. We can create model rivers. And again, you've probably got things like guttering, but have you ever explained or asked them whether they realize that this is actually what's happening in a river system? It's not just that they're pouring water. You can also recreate habitats that they might visit or that they need to be aware of, like beaches. So if you've got small worlds, put in sand, you can add animals, add a bit of that sustainability as well by maybe adding litter and see how they feel about that. They can also use sand to create landforms. So they can make cliffs, they can make volcanoes as well. You can collect data with your, even with progression step 1, because they can collect rain through tarp. So if you put a plastic, a see-through umbrella or see-through tarp above your head, and you can watch how the rain comes down, or you can collect it. You can also look in your school grounds to see what else you could put into a continuous provision. Rocks and fossils are absolutely loving. Kids mostly love those. But also if you've got an area that you could put as a dedicated soil or digging area, so they can actually explore what's underneath the ground. And if you've got sand pits, it's great to create an archaeological dig there as well. So lay out lines and they dig up, and then if you hide things inside, it could be rocks or fossils, or it could be artifacts from the time that you're actually trying to teach them in your history bit as well of the humanities. When we get to progression step 2, again, we're trying to get through the whole of that inquiry process. So we got to get them to start questioning, and they're questioning the world around them. So thinking about all aspects. So we talk about the history and the geography, the human and the physical. And really that's all about looking at a geographical historical lens. And this picture here is literally giving them a lens to actually look through. But you're starting to look for the history in the site where you are, or the geography, how people interact with the natural world. Exploring the natural world is straightforward, it's very much like the science investigations, so finding about the animals and the plants and how they interact together. But if you want to know about the human aspects, you need to undertake some kind of survey. So it could be surveys about the buildings, it could be survey about how people move and how they use objects and use locations. If you're thinking about the in the past, it really depends what your school grounds are like. But the great opportunity is to do something called re-photography. This picture on the bottom right here is a re-photograph. So what you do is you take a photograph from a location in the past. And if you've got old photos of your school, that's brilliant. And then they have to find the location where that photo was taken, and they take a photo of it today. And you can then see how it's changed over time. So that's a really good way of doing it. You can also do field sketches. This is a field sketch here in the bottom left. Now, field sketch is a great geographical skill, but it also gets them to observe things and identify ways in which this is, different aspects of geography are there within that school, within that picture. You're also giving them the opportunity to experiment. So they need to generate questions as they get older. So just sometimes good to let them go off and then come back, not with data. So just let them go off and come back with questions. So things like, well, why is the wind fastest on the field? Or why are there less plants on the footpath? Or why is that building over there hotter than that tree over there? So get them to come up with the questions. So again, like the science ones, I've got a whole heap of geography inquiries that you can undertake. Nearly all of these can be undertaken in your school grounds. But if you can actually get to the wider geography area, what's called your local learning area outside of your school gates, then the potential for teaching outdoor learning there is greatly increased. But thinking about the topic you might be doing, you might be looking at a certain age in history, so Celts or Stone Age. You can look at the materials they've got there and try and do some investigating to see which one would be the most appropriate. You can look at the landscape that you're investigating. It could be you're looking at coastal features, so you can create them and then test them and see what happens to them out of sand. You can be looking at ecocide. So is your school a great place for putting up wind turbines? And if so, where would you put it? Think about the litter. Where's it going? Why is it going there? What's moving it? Where would we put the bins? Could we put solar panels on your roof, and how many, and how would that increase or decrease our reliance on fossil fuels? We could also think about some aspects of history, such as the Greeks. They did trigonometry, so we can look at trees growing. We can also look at creating Archimedes screws, this again with a design aspect, so trying to get water to go uphill. Looking at the humanities in terms of habitats, the habitats you've got in your school grounds, we can see how humans are interacting with them. So how the trampling is affecting them, but also how those habitats are interacting with each other. So where do we have the tallest grass? Where do we have the most mini beasts, and why? So we're really drilling down to the reasoning behind things, whereas with the science, it's all about collecting data and having numbers, really. Rivers, chances are you probably haven't got a river in your school grounds, but what about if your school is going to be flooded? Is there a way in which you could protect it from flooding? And if you could build it, or if you could build a model of it, where would you actually build your houses on it? Romans, again, I've said before about doing trebuchets, and you could do science investigations with those, but you could also design aquifers, taking water from one place to another, and thinking about these siege machines and the design of them as well. We've got Tudors, I've said about making those houses as well, but also we can think about linking that in with the materials they used, how they made them waterproof. That could also link in with survival. So if you're designing shelters or dens using the design process, we could also do an investigation to work out which design is the best and why. And again, when we said about doing the Great Fire of London, we could investigate which material could have stopped the Great Fire of London, or what could we have done to change the way in which the fire moved by changing the landscape or the land use in it. So we're linking the humanities in there with the science that we've mentioned. The weather is a fantastic way of collecting data and undertaking an inquiry process from start to finish, and also integrating that data collection inquiry in your daily aspects of your class. So if you've got a wind station or a weather station outside, when your children are coming in and they're doing either their maths work or they're doing something in the morning, when you're doing a register, if your helper Heather is going out and collecting the rain and finding out how much rained last night, measuring the temperature outside, measuring the wind outside, you're collecting a lovely database of long-term data. And that's something you can then use later on to create some graphs. So that could be something that you integrate into your whole school. You can also use thinking about what's warmest area of your school grounds, which is the coolest. You can think about reflecting materials. So we can bring in some science as well here, but you can make it more meaningful by thinking, right, which is the noisiest part of the school grounds, and how can we create a better area there so it's more peaceful and better for people to learn there. Thinking about people and places, again, surveying them, seeing how people move around your school grounds, or if you have access just to look outside, you can look at traffic moving, different types of traffic at different times of day. You can think about their speed as well, bringing in some maths and numeracy. And again, bringing in some of your of that sustainability. So where should we put solar panels? And you can use an extension of this to bring in a whole school project of trying to make your school more sustainable, which is also leading into the humanities side. And thinking about the grass and all the things that are growing, why are they growing there? Linking that into the weather as well. Again, with habitats as well. Where do mini beasts like to live, and what is it about those conditions that make them want to live there? And you can do this picture on the right here is choice chambers, where you put wood lice into 4 different chambers. One is wet and dry, one is wet and dark, one is dry and dark, one is damp and dry, damp and light, and one is wet and light, and you see which one they prefer. Okay, this is also ways in which we can change this and adapt it for progression step 1, and also adding some extension. A lot of these inquiries, in order to put extensions in, what you're really thinking about in terms of the inquiry process, when you get to the end of it, you need to kind of question what happened, how it went well, how would you make it better, and what questions could we then answer once we've finished our conclusion. This is a good one here, emoji mapping. So you're going around your school grounds and choosing an emoji for the location to see which areas you like and which ones you don't. And this at the top here, this picture here is a solar oven. So we can use that to actually cook, and you can melt chocolate, or you can even cook a pizza on it if it's warm, like today. So that's the inquiry process, and you can use the inquiry process to really cover all other parts of the humanities. But I'm going to go through some examples. What matter statement 2 provide you with the looking about history mainly. So looking at how history, society and identity and governance has changed. And a lot of this, a great way of doing that is recreation. So usually on a small scale, so you're creating models of something from that period in time. So siege machines, creating model rivers, model houses, making some flood prevention measures, making some coastlines, making some volcanoes, the Victorian inventions, whatever links into your topic, you can recreate in model form and they get that hands-on experience. But more hands-on really is thinking about ancient crafts and skills that you could also teach them. Apart from the fact that you've taught them a skill, it really does bring to life that part of history. So Victorian playground games, creating bows and arrows, teaching them how to march like Roman soldiers, like this picture on the top right, teaching them survival skills that had to be used in the Stone Age or even in the war and the Victorian age, such as this rushlight in the middle here, and also making pewter jewellery as well, or dyeing with woad or weaving. These are all activities that needed to be done by children in the past, and being exposed to that and then learning them, they get a better appreciation of what it was like there. And also we've got here pinhole photography. So again, cameras, very easy to use now, but this really gets them to start thinking about how it used to be. One very important aspect of the new curriculum, especially in the humanities thing, is the kindfen. So this kindfen is that sense of space, that your location, the place where your learners come from. And outdoor learning is really essential to that. So lots of things to do is to ask them to start to think about that location as a place for learning. So you could be doing questionnaires with interviews or with locals. You can look at old photos to see what used to be in your school grounds, looking about your local space. It could be their opinion, what they like about it. It could be looking at the past. How has it changed? Why is it the way it is? Who's being affected by any changes? You also need to think about that sense of place, and that brings in all of this kindfen together by thinking about what's there now, how you feel about it, maybe some maps, some significant buildings that are nearby. Going on photo, if you're going to go beyond your school gates and start looking at photo scavenger hunts, you can take photos of places in the past. They have to go find them again, take them in today, or they can go and find what they are like on Google Street View. So you can go on almost a virtual field trip before you go out as in real life. Creating models of your school area, especially looking at landscape features. That's a fantastic way of looking at contours and how things change. And also trying to describe it using poetry. So bringing in some of that language, literacy and communication as well. Right, what matters statement 3, we're also talking about landforms. So this is again, not the natural side of it, so the natural side of the geography. So if we're talking about natural landforms, chances are you probably haven't got a lot of these in your school grounds. You won't have a river, you won't have a mountain, and you won't have a coastline. So creating models gives you that opportunity, and trying to get them to recognize them. It might be that you've got a small scale that you can then turn into an example of what the large scale would be, but getting them to build them and then actually model them and do some testing on them, such as this river on the right here. Created a river out of sand. You then model what happens when the river gets flooded, when the water comes down as rain. You've also thinking about your land use, you can start reading into mapping skills. So mapping skills are brilliant and obviously part of the geography aspect of the humanities. But if you start to map what's in your school grounds, then you're starting to get that skill. If you are lucky enough to have some great history in your school grounds, then try and make that the focus of your topics. So this school on the top right here, this Warwick school, they actually relocated the school onto this site, and they found when they were digging the foundations that it was actually the site of the largest Roman villa in the UK. Now they preserve the site by building the school on top of it. So that school is on top of a Roman villa. Now you may not have a Roman villa, but find out what the history of your school is and your school grounds and your local area. You can create timelines in your school grounds. You can look at your trees and see how the history has gone and changed over the site of the life of the trees, especially if they've been chopped down. You can see their rings. You can see and actually label certain important aspects of the history on those rings. We can also map in your school grounds other things. We can sound map, so looking and listening to what we can see at different areas, and then we color code the map depending on what you hear. Smell mapping. This here is an aroma wheel, so you color code your map depending on what you hear, or emotion mapping, as I said, about using emojis. And then what matters statement 5 is really, there's lots of aspects about their responsibilities, rights and behavior, but all that, a lot of that I wouldn't really teach outdoors. But the main aspect is this community engagement project. And this is a really positive opportunity for you to engage with your local environment and with the local people. So you have to go outside your school grounds for this, talk to the locals and undertake surveys and questionnaires, find out what they like about the local area, what they don't, ways in which it could be improved. And then based on that, if you come up with a project to try and improve it, so it could be that you're putting information boards about the past because nobody realizes about that area. Could be that you need new street furniture, so you could design that. It could be that there's no green space, so we want to build some flower beds and put a wildlife area in, or there's nowhere to play, so we design a play park. Now, this might not be something that you can take to fruition, that you actually make, but the designing of it, the writing to the local council, the undertaking the survey is all part of this possibility to have a community engagement project. You can also, if you want to build on this and make this even bigger, we can talk about big creative problems to either world or local problems. So it could be about litter, could be about global climate change. But again, if you don't ask the question, these children are never going to be starting to think outside the box and come up with some amazing opportunities. You also, again, move from measuring things in your school grounds to measure it beyond that. Microclimate studies are a great way to collect data. And there's going to be quite a variety of things you can measure with very cheap equipment. You just need thermometers, you need something to collect water. Wind meters are very useful. And you can use quite a lot of apps as well. And then looking around your school grounds, see how the microclimate changes from one location to another. You can also look at water. Where does the water go in your school grounds? Is it going straight down the drain? Is there a way you could save it by putting in water bugs? And again, is there a way you could generate electricity to reduce your impact as a school? So bringing these big ideas like global climate change down to a local level is really powerful. So if you've collected data from the temperature in your school grounds, and every year you've done this every day while you've been in school, over 5 years, you would develop a fantastic resource, which you could actually look back on and see whether climate change is actually happening in your school grounds, because you have got that actual data there. Right, that's the humanities. We're now going to move on to the expressive arts. Now, the expressive arts AOLE covers all aspects of the creative arts. So we'll talk about dance, art, drama, music, and film as well. So I'm just going to go through some examples because the What Matters statement is not really the best way to teach it. You need to kind of do a cross curricular. So we're going to be looking at the creative side of it. So on here, we've got lots of things you can do with leaves and natural parts. So down the bottom here, we've got leaf outlines, lovely activity to do with leaves, just painting them to see their outside. So you've almost got a negative picture. You can also do leaf printing and creating a rainbow like we've got here. Also, leaf rubbing is a fantastic thing to do for all age groups. In the middle, we've got a texture hunt. So using loose parts as an inspiration to find different textures. So that's just double-sided sticky tape on a card, and then you look for different textures and stick it on. We've also got salt dough. That's a good way of looking at texture. So finding different materials outside and placing them on shells that are great for that, to provide you with opportunities for different textures. When you've got sticks outside, you can start to use them for natural weaving. This is a bit more complicated for older year groups, but you can use some lashing, which ties it together with string, and then you can start to weave. So depending on what shape you have, it's a circle, we can make a dream catcher, or we can make some Christmas decorations, but you're getting that great fun motor skills, but also you create a lovely piece of artwork at the end as well. Again, still sticking with our loose parts, if we've got stones or some of these loose parts you might want to bring in, you can make balancing towers. Towers is one thing, progression from that, if you're really good, you can try and make archways as well. Bringing in a bit of health and well-being as well, which I'll look at when we get to health and well-being. Mandalas is a great piece of temporal art. So the great thing about using art outside, I think, is you don't have to tidy up after yourself, but also the natural materials there provide you with inspiration to create things. You can't really plan what you're going to do because you may not find the resources you want, and things may not go to plan because chances are what you are making is very temporary. So that artwork that you're making, the wind will come and it will go. So you do have to be able to let it go. So mandalas are a great way of you being creative, but also it's very mindful. And then when the wind comes and blows it away, you need to let it go. You can't, be annoyed about it. But you can either do it as group work or it can be separate and individual, but it means that you've got a great use of textures, colors, great use of leaves when you've got autumn, of course, with the different colors, but also in the summer when you've got flowers. Just make sure you get permission so you know you're allowed to pick things. You're not going to completely decimate the flower beds where they wanted to keep them as flower beds. You can also create artist palettes by just getting tiny colors and sticking them again on double-sided sticky tape on just a piece of paper. And you can use that to actually think about ways in which we could create our own natural paint as well. Large scale landscape drawing is really nice as well. So I like to roll out huge rolls of paper and get them to recreate what they see around them. And again, you've got that group artwork, collaborative working. Large paper art is fantastic outside. And again, paint works brilliantly, but you could also look at materials, collect them and just rub it on the paper and see if you can make some natural art as well. We've also got willow. Willow is a fantastic resource if you've got it in your school grounds. So this bottom left one here is a willow star. So weaving willow into shapes, if it's still green, it will actually grow when you put it into a flower pot. If you look on the top left here, this is almost like, you might have heard of pyrography, which is a way of burning into wood. But if you haven't got pyro pen, this is a great way of using engraving into wood. So this is just been cut in with a little knife, and then you rub in a spice like turmeric or paprika, and then you cover it with an oil and it all comes out and you get this dark ones. It's beautiful. You can also create mobiles, and I mean hanging mobiles, not phones, by collecting items. Again, it could be your school grounds. It could be that you go on a walk outside to a park, or maybe in the if you've got a beach near you, you can go along the strand line. So collecting the materials and creating a piece of artwork out of that, dangling down from a structure that you've maybe made out of willow. I love using mirrors outside. You go it for teaching symmetry, but you can also use it to hide. So you're hiding mirrors, and lots of this artwork, as I said, is very temporal. So it's really important you take photos of it, and lots of the artwork looks better once you've taken a photo as well, and that will go into their hub folder or into their outdoor learning folder. You can also use natural parts such as the leaves here for printing, great for paints. You can use them to colour in things, and also inspiration from outside. If you've got sculptures in your school grounds, or if you've got local areas which you've got sculptures, great opportunity to use that for either drawing or using it for rubbings as well. If you've got fires, you can use that again to actually fire clay. Again, this is going back to using a bit of humanities, a bit of history, going back in time. But if you get them to create pinch pots, you put them around a fire and they will start to actually harden over time. If you've got growing willow, we can start to make some larger willow weaving structures. So these ones here, I know most people created domes and circles and areas like that, but you could actually try and weave it into shapes. It takes a bit of skill, but it doesn't matter about the end result. What you're doing is trying to be creative. Using the colors as a color palette, as I said before, is really useful when autumn time comes, and trying to extract those colors from it. You can do chromatography, but if you just try and use that and work out that spectrum of colors, it's an inspiration you can have for your pictures. At the top right here, we've also got dyes. So if you're using natural materials to make dyes, there's a lot out there you can use. This is woad that makes really good blue, and it gets exposed to the air, it gets more blue. You can also use onion skin, that creates brown. Stinging nettle makes a great green, so does grass. And turmeric makes a lovely yellow. So using that dyeing, you can also use actually dye material, or what I tend to do is use kitchen roll, because you can dye it with that and it looks amazing as well. Pinhole photography. Again, you can make pinhole cameras actually out of anything. Could be a shoebox, could be a can. And if you've got paper that you can either use sun paper, like we've got on the bottom left here, again, it's exposed to the sun for a short length of time for 15 minutes, then you put it into water and it fixes it. So you can see the outlines of leaves and things. Or with a pinhole camera, you could do the same. And I said about using the historical creation of either pendants, or it could be that you're using it for the top of spears. So these are at the bottom right, we've got cuttlefish bones, and you can scrape them out using just a knife. Actually, a nail will work. Make a shape, and then if you heat up some pewter, got to do this outside, shouldn't do inside. Heat up the pewter, it will actually, it's a lead-free pewter you can only get now, so it is safe. But do it outside, heat it up, it will melt, then you pour it into the mold that you've created, wait for it to cool down, put it into some water, and then you will have a metal pendant or a metal spearhead or whatever you've created. So a bit of art, but also bringing in a bit of history there as well. This picture on the right hand side, if you don't follow James Brunt on Twitter, he does amazing pieces of artwork with schools and himself, and he just goes around creating these bits of temporal art, then takes a photo of it, and then it just blows away. So he's got amazing inspiration, but the amount of time you must spend is huge, but it's a great measure of your patience if you can have a go and create something based on his work. On a smaller scale, thinking about the shapes of plants, especially and flowers, and I love grass flowers. So on the top left here, these are grass flowers here, and creating natural picture frames for your picture. Great use of sticks as well. In the middle here, this is making kaleidoscopes. So this was in autumn when we went around a garden. We collected up lots of different coloured flowers and leaves, put them into a see-through thing, and then you just put them in the end of a tube. And in the tube, we had a three-sided bit of silver paper, so like a mirror, but it was actually just silver coloured paper. And then if you make a hole in one end and turn it round, you've made yourself a kaleidoscope. Now, oak gall ink, if you've seen these on oak trees, oak galls are created by little gall wasps, but you can actually make ink out of it. And this ink is the ink that the medievals used to write all of the Bibles and all of their books. And it's incredible stuff, but very straightforward to actually create. Right, moving on to dance now. Again, it got lots of space outside, but also you've got the potential to create your own costumes. So we've got natural materials we can make masks out of, we can make crowns. We can also use the outside as inspiration to create our dance. So this picture here is them actually recreating being different mini beasts. So they're actually being centipedes because they need an awful lot of legs there. So using outside, you could also try and be these animals, try and move like mini beasts. And that means you're using your body for a different purpose and you're trying to recreate what you see. You can also think about life cycles, try and recreate the life cycle of those animals, the caterpillars. I do an activity called flight school, and I teach them to fly, and they've got to move their arms with the wing beats of the different animals, be it a swallow, or be it a duck, or be it a dragonfly. And it's quite complicated, but it's a good way of them getting used to the shape of their body and how it works. You can also use their bodies to recreate leaf shapes, or to actually mime geographical processes, so they can create a meander or create a volcano erupting. They could also copy the movements of the trees, so that all the plants, so if the wind's blowing, they have to move with them, and they have to try and mirror what the plants are doing. They can also use their bodies to show what's going on around them. So create the shapes of leaves, or I like to just use my hands and put my fingers around the outside of the leaves, just to get that idea of what shape it is. But that kind of leads on to the dance that you have in Bollywood. So it kind of can lead on to a dance move, so they can then add music and some choreography. And of course, you've got the rain dances and ways in which you can just follow the lines around your school grounds. So trying to use pathways to be creative in your choreography as well. You've also got opportunities to use dance in your normal school celebrations as well. So this one here is a St. David's Day dance that we did with dragon, and also Morris dancing and maypole dancing. So bringing in some dance, again, using your outdoor space in the springtime and in March as well. Moving on to drama, again, you can use the space and the wind to try and test how good you are at projection. So you could do find a location. Lots of schools now have got stages, but you can explore the use of echoes and amphitheatres. You can also create natural masks. So you've got that mask making, maybe camouflage. You can create set designs. So this picture on the bottom here is a little set design for a little part show. And it could be that you then turn it into a puppet show, like on the right here. And again, it's storytelling. They're participating in it. And you could also get the audience to tell you what happens next, or they could try and narrate the story for you. All of these are using the background landscape as a backdrop to the scene, but it could also be used as an inspiration for the plot of the play. So using what you've got behind you to inspire you to say what's going to happen next. You can also use props in nature. So we could use sticks, etc., and loose parts. There's this one here on the left is also a clay face. So again, we could use that to either bring objects, inanimate objects, to life. That's, I just noticed there's a worm crawling out of that. But so we could bring trees to life by putting faces on them, and that could be part of our show or of our performance. And then the last bit of expressive arts is the before we get to the music, is the film and media outdoors, which is a bit different to, again, in the old curriculum. But again, so many opportunities to do it outside. We could record a soundscape. So you're adding a sound map. So you listen to each location in your school grounds, and maybe even put a QR code for each location so that you could link it to a recording for that place, or it could be instructions or something about the history of that place. You could also go and find clips. So if you listen to something and then they have to go and find where it was recorded and maybe re-record it, they could do their own sound effects. So creating a radio play and then record their own sound effects outside. You can make a film trailer. A lot of schools now are using green screens, but what about a real green screen? Go outside and use the backdrop as your landscape, as the backdrop to your film. You could also do a film trailer, so you can use stop motion capture. So if you've got Lego figures, or if you've got toys, you can use that, as well as having people acting and dressing up as well. Making a still walk, which means you go on a walk and you take photos and stills, or you draw pictures, or you write a poem and you combine it all together, maybe in iMovies, to create your own film. There's a great person called Alistair Duncan who does still walks. There's a link on the Padlet. And then, of course, you've got photography there, which on every scale, you've got macro, re-photography. You could do a photo trail trying to find these locations. Building on your learners' interests as well, we've got game design, which of course is part of the media, and recreating some of these games that they're doing online out in the real world is a fantastic creative opportunity. So things like Minecraft or Pokemon Go, let's recreate that outside. And then escape rooms, again, something else that's coming. If you can design an escape room in your school grounds, so problem solving, QR codes, maybe getting codes to open treasure boxes, etc. You can make an outdoor music video, so making a music band, but then the video is undertaken outside. And then you could create a virtual reality experience of your school grounds, or much more difficult, a wildlife documentary of what you see. So you could use their science and technology understanding of the plants and animals in their school grounds, using their literacy, and then they're filming to create a wildlife documentary to bring it all together. Last thing on the expressive arts is music. Lots of opportunities to create natural instruments using loose parts. So it could be that they're natural things such as sticks, and it could be that they're just hitting things, or you could go to much more effort and create things like xylophones or wind chimes. Wind chimes and xylophones, again, doesn't matter what they're made out of. You can create them out of anything at all, but as long as you get some noise out of them, you can start to make your own band. You can also make kazoos, which you could do out of bamboo, and then you just put a bit of tissue over the end, and then it makes a lovely kazoo. Drum kits can be anything outside, and you can use then that then to teach things like repetition of sound. So you do a melody or a rhythm and they repeat it. You can also get inspiration from wildlife or from the wind. So the wind provides you with the dynamics. So as it gets louder, then we get louder, or as it drops, then we decrease in pitch as well. You can also create a soundscape for your school grounds so that the area has a different tune associated with it, and make it like a sound trail. So as you walk around your school grounds, you hear different musics. You could then create a listening pod where you make brilliant acoustics within one place in your school grounds that you can then listen to it. So it kind of blocks out the natural noise that you don't want to hear. And then linking this in with some science, you can investigate echoes and acoustics to see where the best place to have a band in your school grounds. Or you could create a sound garden, which brings all of these together. So your musical instruments, your composing pod, your listening pod, your performance area, and bring that all together in one location. Right, last one. So last AOLE is the health and well-being. Now, health and well-being, what matters statement 1 is all about the physical health, which is very straightforward because, of course, we're talking about PE, but I'm not going to do PE. We're looking at ways in which we can use the natural landscape around our school grounds that we can help with physical health. If you've got trees or a woodland, great opportunity to provide them with some more riskier and some more challenging activities using things like trees. If you've got tree climbing opportunities, if you can put up swings or rope ladders, tight ropes are really good. And a great way of doing progression with that is to put up a tight rope, like a slack line with 2 handles. And as they get better at that, take one handle away and it turns into a postman's walk, which is what this girl upside down is on. When they get good at that, take away that handle and then they've got a tight rope. So you're building in some progression, and it's a great skill if they can use that as well. Obstacle courses, either you create it or they create it using nature as inspiration for those different things. So going underneath benches, over stumps, around trees, but also bringing in some exercises as well. Steeplechase is just a way of keeping them going. So they go on a horse race around the school grounds and keep them nice and warm. Great if they're getting really cold on a winter's day. Port starboard, again, bringing in some of those mapping skills and in some of that physical activity. So you tell them directions, northeast, southwest, they have to run in those directions. Also, you can bring in a lot of the humanities mapping skills by bringing in orienteering. If you have the OEAP outdoor challenge cards, there's a great progression there for orienteering. It goes through how to start with really simple map orientating, and then goes on to every skill you need, including using compasses to get to be able to do an orienteering course. So that's a great cross-curricular activity. Generating an orienteering course in your school grounds is not difficult, because you just need to have set markers in your location and a map of your school grounds. You can even use Google Maps, not Google Maps, Google Earth to create that as well. Making a trail, so laying out sticks to show in which direction you're going, and again, getting them to walk or run it. On the smaller of the younger ones, we can just do some really simple things like puddle jumping, trying to get across large puddles or get through it without getting too wet. Rolling down hills, depending on your demographic of your learners, sometimes these opportunities are not going to be available to them. So sometimes something as simple as that can be a fantastic opportunity to get them to be physically active. If you're going wider, if you've got access to things like rivers, but also if you've got guttering, if you can try and work out ways of stopping that as well. If you've got to move large objects like rocks, or if you're moving logs, again, great for that physical health as well. Catching a falling leaf, that's really tricky to do, really keeps you active, and you've got to be aware as well. Barefoot walking, this is great for your mental health and well-being, but it's a fantastic thing to do, especially when the grass is slightly wet, or if you've got a range of substrates. So if you've got little stones or big stones that you can walk on and the yard. So take their shoes and socks off, and they just walk through it, and just take some time to really feel it between your toes. Try and pick the grass with your toes, bit of toe yoga, and great opportunity to just get them to really let themselves be exposed to senses they usually don't get exposed to in school. Carrying on from that, we've got some great games that you can do in a wider area that are difficult to do inside. So wide games are ones where you get them to go from one location to another, and then they do some kind of problem solving at that location. Hide and seek, or where 1, 2, 3, where are you? Again, large scale, get everyone to hide in one place, and then they all have to move to another place to try and find the people who are hiding somewhere else. Yoga, again, doesn't mean you have to be a qualified yoga teacher to do some simple yoga moves outside. There's some great yoga out there. Most schools are doing it, but usually inside in front of a screen. But if you feel confident in just doing some simple ones that the students have been doing inside already, just why not do it outside, especially on the grass outside at the end of the day. It's a lovely way to calm down. Physical health, in terms of the What Matters Statement 1 in health and well-being, is also about nutrition as well. So thinking about food, especially growing it, planting it, growing it, eating it, preparing it, that's a great way of bringing in that healthy understanding of nutrition. So if you've got veg patch, obviously you're planting vegetables, you then grow them, you then harvest them, you then prepare them. If you've got a fire circle, you can then cook them, and then you eat them. So that's a whole big, fantastic aspect of this health and well-being that you can tick on that side. You've also got foraging opportunities. So in your school ground, you may have things you might be able to pick. Now, you can stick with the obvious ones like blackberries, or if you've got elderflowers at this time of year, you can make elderflower cordial. If you've got apples, you can make apple juice. But showing them where those foods come from is really important for this one. And if you're cooking on the campfire, you're also bringing in one of the other What Matters statements, which we'll look at in a minute, which is all about the aspect of risk. What Matters Statement 2 is all about the mental health, which is obviously really important, but requires you to take a bit of time out and to think about how we're going to calm things down. So there's a few just simple calming activities to do here. I always do one of these activities when I take a group outside. As soon as we're out, I call it a transition activity, and it just gets them to basically get out of the doing inside and into the relaxing and then doing outside. It's change of mindset. So sit spot means that you go to a location, preferably somewhere where you can't see anybody else, and you just close your eyes, you sit still, and you just breathe 3 times and try and connect with what's going on around you. Then you just start listening to see what you can hear. Then you feel what's around you, what you're sitting on, give it a sniff so you can smell. And then last of all, open your eyes and see what you can see. And just taking a bit of time out to connect with what's going on is a great way to calm down. Now, this doesn't have to be a long session. This could be something that takes 20 minutes. It could be something that you just need your learners to stop and calm down. So you just take a breath. So you stop, take a breath in and out, and that could be enough. For nursery and reception, we tend to do listening. So in a circle, we just close our eyes and then we turn off our mouths, turn off our eyes and turn our ears up and we just listen. And again, the longer they do this and the more regular they do it, the better they do it for a longer length of time. And then they can feedback what they've heard if they want to, or we can just, just get that to calm them down. You can also use that to calm your eyes down by just looking very gently at what you see in front of you. So not focusing in on one thing, and that's good for your eyes as well. Or we can count the birds as we're listening. Meditation, again, I do a lot of meditation with my learners, and all I do is a visualization. So they lie down on this mat, like in the picture here, and I just take them on a journey. So they lie down, they close their eyes, they imagine they're lying in the bottom of the underneath the trees, and I float them up through the tree's canopy and I take them away to another place. Great way to take them to somewhere that you haven't got in your school grounds, maybe to the beach, under the sea, up to space. And then you just float them back and then they come back and they're usually really chilled after that. It's a great way of engaging in the locations that you haven't got. Some longer ones. So again, you might think, right, these activities are something we need to build on a bit more. So we're going to take a bit more time doing it. You could go on a sensory walk. So if you blindfold either all of your group and they hold their shoulders of each other when they walk in a line, or you can do it as a pair activity, or like this bottom right picture here is meet a tree. So you walk along the ground or you get taken to a tree. Just make sure your partner is responsible for your safety so you don't push you into a tree. When they get to the tree, they have to feel it, smell it, use all their senses, and then you take them back and then they take their blindfold off. They have to try and find their tree using the senses that they tried before. You can also do nature connection walks. Now that could be anything at all. It could be that you're collecting things. It could be that you're smelling things. It could be that you're looking at things. Human camera is a great way of doing that. One person is the camera. One person is the photographer. The camera closes their eyes. Photographer just positions them so they have a really good view, presses their ear, their eyes open for 5 seconds, and then they close it. And then they really focus in on that one object. Mirror walk, you can use a mirror underneath your nose or on by your chest, and instead of looking in front of you, you're looking down at the forest above you, that canopy. And again, that provides you with an opportunity to really see what is going on above your head in front of you instead of you moving. Choosing an object that you've got as well that links to your emotional well-being. So if you're thinking about going on a walk and you're saying, right, how do you feel here? Find an object that actually describes it. Or you could give out pictures of emojis, and those emojis will then represent different ones, and they can see whether they are feeling happy about where they are or whether they're actually got some issues that you might want to deal with. Right, excuse me, just gonna all right, just move to the wrong again. And also some longer ones. The mandala one that I showed you in the expressive arts one is a fantastic one to do for mindfulness. The way I do that so that it's slightly different to the expressive arts is that I divide the circle into segments, and each segment is given either to a pair or to an individual person, and they can do what they like with that bit. Because you do find when you do collaborative artwork, there is a bit of, people arguing about, oh, you just stood on my bit and you destroyed my bit. So if you give them a wedge to work on, and then when you've finished, you can then look around and see what everybody has actually found. You can also go around collecting things like colours, You can look at things on a smaller scale. So I use subscopes, which are a bit like the little mirrors that you had the dentist use, and you're looking underneath things. So really focusing in. You can even give them magnifying glasses. They don't have to have glass in them. It's just a way of focusing in on a small scale. And when you've got these opportunities to get them looking, get them to come up with some adjectives about how they feel themselves, the objects they see. I've done some group poems, some great group poems around fires. So while they're watching the fire, they need to say how they feel and a word to describe the fire. And then we just say those words all in a circle, and that's our group poem. And it's a great way of focusing in. Micro landscapes is when you have your learners sitting down and close their eyes and you describe a landscape, a really intricate one, but it's what's in front of them, but it's on a small scale. So it could be like a log that you're talking about. They open their eyes and they see what you were talking about. And it's a very powerful way of getting them to see in their head first and then revisualize it when they see it's on a very different scale. Also, activities, we can use the snow if you've got it, and mud as well, just to get that feeling of between your fingers, but also it's quite mindful as well if you're generating something without any expectation, just have a go and build and play. For older year groups, you can still bring in some mindfulness activities with lots of skill involved as well. And they have to be skillful and they have to be mindful, because if they're not, it's going to be slightly dangerous, which is also part of the What Matters Statement 3. So thinking about whittling. So if you've got forest school leaders that you can use knives with, so if you're learners, you can whittle things, you can make anything out of wood. Creating fires, fire lighting needs an awful lot of perseverance. And that means they've got to be mindful about it. And then once it's there, watching it, a really nice mindful activity. Creating with clay, again, that tactile feeling, great mindful outdoor activity. Again, using drawing and painting as well, with no expectation, just have a go, draw something, put it together. Worry stones or letters, lovely to do outside. You can collect stones, you can either write on them or just think of your worries and put them in your hand. Letters, you can write them, especially if you've got fire, you then put it on the fire and hopefully it will then blow your worries away. And making daisy chains, again, just something that you've probably done or they can do, but it's something they're doing it mindfully. They're thinking about how they're doing it all the time. The other aspect of that health and well-being is working as a team. So team building activities are really good to do outside. Pioneering projects, again, higher level, so need some skills. So this right one here, this is a picnic bench that we created, requires lashing, and be able to tie sticks together, collecting the right sticks, and a lot of design as well. But it's a great thing. You can't do it on your own. You've got to build together. You could also link into some of the things we've said about building, like the trebuchets and the ballistas. That requires teamwork. You could make rope bridges or chariots or stretchers, and all of these require lots of skills and lots of people working together. There's also lots of team building games we can do, like spider's web, putting up spider's web between trees, and you've got to try and get through it without touching the water. Toxic waste is picking up a bucket full of something, usually balls, with an inner tube with strings, so you can't get within 2 meters of it. So working together, they've got to speak together, good communication skills. Leaky tube is when you have a bit of piping which is sealed at the bottom. You put a ping pong ball in it. They have to get the ping pong ball out, but they can't put their hand into the tube, so they have to fill it up with water, but the water's got loads of holes in it, so they've got to put their fingers over it in order for the water to fill it up. And then you've got lava field, which is this picture in the middle, where you've got to get across the lava field without touching it, using something like, it could be stepping stones, it could be planks, but there's not enough for you to get across, so you have to work together. If you've got some equipment that you can use for team building activities, things like these skis here with multiple people, don't do it with more than 4, it's almost impossible. But you don't need specialist equipment. Flipperoo is just a sheet that you put on the ground. Everybody stands on it and they just have to flip it over, but none of them are allowed to touch the ground. Helium stick is just long sticks, and you have everybody standing with their fingers next to each other like that, the stick lines like that, and then the stick lines along them, and they have to all be touching the stick but not holding it. And the aim is to get the stick on the ground. And because there's so many people all trying to just keep their finger next to the stick, it rises up into the air. So again, lots of communication skills required. Same as creating things like dens. If you can't communicate and you can't work together in a group, then your den building is very difficult. Rollerball, using gutters and balls, but also with water as well. Again, if you set the rules so they can't move if they're holding guttering and they've got to get water or ball from one bucket to another. If you try and combine some art with it as well, so creating land art, a nice way of doing that is either as a group activity or half of the picture is created by one person and their partner has to come and finish it as well. And then they can start to begin to design their own team building games as well. So there's so many more things you can bring in if they come up with their own ideas. And then the last thing, a really important aspect of the What Health and Wellbeing, What Matters statement is all about identifying and assessing risk. And inside your classroom, it's very safe. And inside your school grounds, it's also very safe. But we can provide some element of risk so that they can identify it and manage it. If we don't expose our learners to risk, then they won't understand how to actually make sure that they're taking risk, but they know how to manage it. So obvious ones are things like lighting fires, thinking about the fire rules, coming up with the fire rules together, using woodwork tools, so using saws and axes and knives. You've got to have some rules around that, and you've got to assess risk. But also some of the other ones not so obvious, making dens. Before you go into your den, you need to risk assess. Is it going to fall on your head? Are those logs too big to carry on your own? Do we need to make sure it's in the right place? And then tree climbing. I would suggest if you've got learners who are tree climbing, if you do set rules, it's got to be that you can't help them up, because if you help them up, they probably can't get themselves down, or they can't go up higher than you can reach. So you could help them if they do get into trouble. So you're introducing this element, but it's really important that you do it collaboratively, that they are helping to understand the risk. You're not just saying this, we're not doing this because it's risky. So getting them to come up with the reasons behind it. Right, so those are hopefully an awful lot of ideas for teaching all 6 AOLEs. I hope you've enjoyed that and you've got some ideas from that session. Now, this session today is actually, as I said, a collaboration of 6 2-hour sessions that I've done as part of outdoor learning in the Curriculum for Wales 20-session course that I've been running since last September. If you would like more information about the course, I am going to be running it again starting in September, but all of the sessions, I'm on session 17 now, all of the sessions are available as a recording on the Nature Days shop. They're £10 a session. You can click on this link when you get the PowerPoint if you want to find out more there. I've also created a whole set of outdoor learning challenge cards for each of the AOLEs. So this is the health and wellbeing one on the slide here. Each card, I wrote them for Key Stage 2, how to undertake independent learning in Key Stage 2, but in fact, people have been using them for all year groups. And it provides you with a structure for a question that you have to answer or an aim, and then success criteria, some questions to help you, some extension things to move you along, what equipment you might need, and they're all color coded. And what you get is a digital download, so you can then print them off in your school whichever year group wants it. I'm also going to be starting a subscription service, so it's going to be Welsh curriculum based outdoor learning lesson plans, ideas, and research and stuff that I've been doing, which will be available on a subscription service. And I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to show you the Padlet. So this Padlet here, let's do share. This is the Padlet that I've created for the course that I will be running, and each section here is associated with one aspect of the course that I've been studying, that I've been teaching. And if you scroll across, you will see that we got every single AOLE has its own section, And within each one, you can scroll down and there's the Enchanted Forest, literacies, and each one is either a document or a link to a new website. It's a great one on measuring trees there from NRW, and that's the footprint, the dinosaur one I've mentioned. So anything I've mentioned is going to be here on the Padlet, and it's going to be added to all the time, because every time I do another course, it gets another section. So you'll have access to that. So you can look at that when you get your PowerPoint. Let me go back to that. And then of course I do insets in schools. So if you are local, or if you don't mind paying for my travel expenses, I go to your school and I will teach you how to use your outdoor space to teach any aspect of the curriculum you want to be covered. That's usually in an inset day. And again, if you look at my website, Nature Days, you can have a look and see the prices on there. If you have enjoyed today, or even if you haven't, please do fill in my feedback form. This is the feedback form here. You can use the QR code or click on the link here. This is the Padlet again, if you want it. And if you are interested in more CPD, next week I've got my next session on outdoor learning in the curriculum for Wales. It's on progression in outdoor learning. So it's how to ensure there's progression throughout your school in outdoor learning, and also following differentiation as well. And that is it. So if anybody has any questions, we have 1 minute left. I know there's an awful lot that I've been through there, but if you have any questions, please do raise your hand or unmute. No? Right, fantastic. Well, hopefully that was useful for you. As soon as I've looked at the recording, and I will send you that. And then if you've got a Hub account, I've seen there's lots of Hub addresses there. I'll download those. If you haven't, you'll get it on WeTransfer. Please download it quickly, because you will lose it. And please fill in the feedback form. And I look forward to seeing you at another session soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.